Thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I would like to ask you first, how were your first experiences in music? In which point you discovered music and became an important part of you?
Uh, I was kind of forced into it as a kid, doing piano lessons. Parents had me go and do that at like second or third grade. So I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I did that for about 5 years. And for some reason around, 11, 12, right before I was a teenager, I kind of discovered that I actually liked music. And from there, I kind of I took a year off of piano trying to figure out what I wanted to do with it. And I was listening to a lot more rock music and pop music at the time too, and then kind of decided that I should start learning guitar, probably around 12 and a half or 13. And but yeah, it goes way back for me. I mean, I definitely started early, and I'm thankful for that because it gives you such a strong footing when you learn at that age. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this could be kind of a general question, but I would like to know your opinion. In your opinion, what's the importance of music for human life or human existence? Because somebody just thinking music about only from the entertainment point of view, but I know that you have a very deep thoughts about music. In your opinion, what's the importance of music for life?
Yeah, I mean, going back to my early teenage years, the thing that drew me to it, especially more atmospheric forms of music and music that use synthesizers as well and things like that, was that it would create pictures in my mind's eye. Basically, I could just close my eyes and kind of drift off, and as like a 12 or 13-year-old, um, that was really a different experience than I had had before. I had realized that I had seen these images in my beneath my eyelids for years, as a kid, and never really realized it, but music kind of helped me connect to it. So I would see like landscapes and get other types of imagery. It could be all kinds of landscapes or mountains or even alien universes, I think. So I for me, that was really what got me um further into it in terms of how it affected my physical self. um I mean, other than the cliche of being the universal language, like also mathematics is, like, I think that it's important on that level as well, and culturally. Um, and I've always been into music that's, kind of from different areas in the world. Even though I've kind of been centered on, guitar music from Europe and the States mostly, but I appreciate all kinds of music from everywhere that I can find it. And I try to, with Echo S too, more recently, I try to incorporate more of that. Um, whereas in my early years, it was more just focused on progressive metal and heavy guitar music. So
Wonderful. Well, Ethan, you play many different instruments, and you produce and you play all the instruments in Echo O's, at least the most of them. Is there an instrument that you feel more comfortable with it, that you feel that is your instrument, or all of them are for you a good way of express yourself?
uh it kind of morphs, like for my teenage years, like guitar was the most important thing. And then when I started Greyhaven, the progressive metal band, that we started in high school with some friends of mine, I got much more into synthesizers and keyboards, uh, and that kind of morphed out of that. I don't know, and back into guitar for a number like 10 years or so. And then I started to get much more enamored with folk instruments and more acoustic instruments in general. Like I went back and kind of re-studied up on some classical guitar that I had learned, when I was in high school, because I took classical guitar lessons at that point. And so I got back into playing fingerstyle. And that's kind of, maybe it was like 2010 or 2011, I kind of made the the transition from playing pick style guitar over to finger style, and I pretty much play exclusively finger style nowadays. Um, and so like, but yeah, I got into folk instruments. Like I love a lot of Celtic music, and hammered dulcimer kind of became a big focus on last couple of albums. I'll use that just because I really like it's the way it cuts through a mix and adds a really nice glassy kind of tone, um, and creates a lot of rhythm too. So I mean, yeah, there's been a number of different things, but it's kind of moved from like electric to electronic synthesizers, and then on into back to acoustic music. And like I found that acoustic music can be really fun, especially kind of if it's a bit technical. I'm not a terribly technical musician, but if it's a bit technical, it can be really fun to get into. And when you master something, it really feels great to be able to do all of that, and you feel very connected. It's like synthesizers allow you to create any sound almost that you can possibly imagine that you can't really create with acoustic instruments, but acoustic instruments allow you to feel like a little bit more like a human being, a little bit more connected to people, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yes. Well, talking about Echo O's, I'm really curious about what's behind the name of this very personal project that you are developing since a lot of time. Uh, what is the meaning for you of Echo O's?
Yeah, so the story goes back to Greyhaven, my first band, and I felt that we needed a new name for our first album. We needed to change our band name because we just felt, we were using a Tolkien-based name, and we kind of felt like, oh, there's lots of progressive rock and metal bands that have done that. Why don't we do something different? And then I was looking through a thesaurus, and I always liked the idea of echoes or call and response, or anything to do with the word echoes. Like, can I blend that in with something else? And I was looking through this thesaurus, and all of a sudden I was just like, oh, echo us, like call and response, or like a connection of some sort. Not so, I mean, it kind of can sound like a command to some degree, but it was really just it was kind of like, well, that's also, it seems like catchy to me. It seems like something that people would remember, or at least I would remember. And then the label, we were going to call Greyhaven. We were really thinking of calling it Echo Us, believe it or not. And I don't think it fit, actually. Now in hindsight, looking back on that music, I don't think it fit at all. But the label that we were on, doing the Greyhaven album on, just said no. You've already distributed a demo tape over here, and people are really interested in the album, and we don't want to lose any of the the notice that you already have, by changing the name. And there's also a Pink Floyd. I remember this story. There's a Pink Floyd cover band in Germany called Echoes, and they were really afraid because the English versus German and so on and so forth, and how people deduce and get language and whatnot. They might think that they were the same thing, and so they didn't want to do that. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from. And then for the Echo Us material later on, especially, it just kind of fit because my lyrics were moving into all these kind of metaphysical, kind of fantasy, somewhat direction to a degree, and like building concept albums and things like that. So that's the short story, I think, about how the name came about. So
Wonderful. Well, talking about your creative process, Ethan, I would like to know, do you have a very special way of creating music that you call musical channeling? Am I right? So I would like to know more about that process. What is musical channeling?
It's the same thing about the way that the name of the project came to me. It just kind of came out of right out of the top of my head. A few other artists have used this kind of term before. It's not completely uncommon, but I always felt connected to this form of composition where you feel like you don't really have any control over it, and it's just coming through you and expressing itself through you. I don't spend like what I feel is the best music that I write is usually written in a very, very natural and kind of open way where I don't really think too much about what I'm doing. I'd be working on lyrics, and like a whole stanza of lyrics will just come really quickly, like within 5 or 10 minutes. I just literally write them out. Da, 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 da. I'm not thinking about them for the most part. I might have to think about one phrase in there, like one line, how to end it or something like that. But so like that typically, like one that I remember I was going to say was off of an album a couple of albums ago called "To Wake a Dream in Moving Water," and the title track was very much that way. And I had sort of thought that I had lost that type of inspiration or ability, but when that track came to me, it was very inspiring, because it like, for me, it releases me. It makes my blood pressure go down. It makes me feel connected, right? It makes me feel like I'm like things are inspiring. If I sat there and had to think about that for a really long time, how I'm going to come up with these lyrics about this particular concept, I'd rather not know what the concept is and just come out, and then be like, oh, I think that this is what this means. So that's how it works with lyrics. With the music, I kind of tend to just, I'm kind of like a painter, in that I'll throw up one thing. It might be just a 5-note melody line or something, and I'll just be all of a sudden just attracted to that one thing. And then sometimes I'll throw up a completely different other section of music, or start another bit of melody or ostinato, whatever it is, chordal thing, and I'll have a few lyrics lying around. And then at some point I'll realize that all this stuff kind of fits together. And so then I'll bring it together into one file and start working on it that way. I don't tend to sit around and think about it too much. Like I don't, which is bad for practicing, because a lot of times I'll kind of forego practicing because I'll wait for the inspiration to come. But one thing I've been doing in recent years is just making sure that I spend a certain amount of time playing, and that's not usually when the best stuff happens, though. It usually happens like when like sitting here with you or whatever, like I'll be like, oh my God, I have to go write something down right now. That kind of thing. I'll be doing something else entire, like around the house usually. And then I'll get kind of like a wave of melody through my mind, and I'll be like, okay, I got to go write this down and follow it. And a lot of times that will lead, like when that happens, I'll know it, and that'll lead to a whole album. Which is kind of why I think I've been, I think, fairly successful with taking one melody, and then weaving it throughout an album, and recapitulating it and coming back to it in multiple different ways. But yeah, that's also why I love classical music too, is like you just take one theme and kind of mutate it, into these different things.
Yes. Well, Ethan, when you started Echo Us, did you imagine that the project will be successful? You have wonderful reviews in many places in the world, and you have a very worded album. Tomorrow Will Tell this Story. Did you imagine the impact of your music for other people that this project will have?
To be honest, I don't think about it all that much. And I've seen a lot of great stuff, said about this music. And at the same time, it is still very underground, even in the progressive scene. So I feel kind of like, yes, I've gotten a lot back from people, but it's never really been like the whole apparatus of like promoting an album and putting it out is totally different than when I'm sitting in my studio, or being around the house and that inspiration comes. The two aspects of doing this are completely disjointed to me, and that's another reason why I will do live shows here and there over the course of my career, but I don't do a ton of it, because I've always been more about I wanted to focus on the inspiration, and not so much focusing quite as much on the outer world, I guess. At the same time, we all have to focus on the outer world in order to get the music out there and make sure that people do hear it, because it's a huge sea of music out there these days. When I remember when Greyhaven started, I mean, we got noticed just by, sending out 15 demo tapes, and, it would kind of blow up a message board, and then, 30 or 50 more people might order it directly from us. We were just literally dubbing the tapes and putting them out, and we got a record deal based on that. And we didn't, I remember our record label, they would throw out 15 promos. We still sold a sizable amount of units for a one-time first album band. And these days, you just don't see that. You can promote everywhere. You can send hundreds and hundreds of promos out. And you get great reviews sometimes, and you hear back from people. But it's a much more of a miss kind of proposition these days. It's gotten much harder, and I feel greatly appreciative of the fact that I'm old enough, or was old enough at the time, to put out music in the 90s when it was a little bit different than it is now. And even in the 90s, things were already changing in a big way. But yeah, I feel great. I was happy that the who I've worked with over the years, and the musicians that have kind of come and been a part of the project has also been. I've never really gone after collaborating with bigger, trying to find someone to ride the coattails of. I just want to work with other musicians, that are great at what they do and want to be a part of it. And so it's just miles different from the way it was when I was a kid or in high school. That kind of gave us, kind of a bit of inspiration back then. It was like, oh, all we have to do is this. We just have to throw out a demo tape and then record an album and focus on the music and play live shows. And but today, you have social media, you have all these things that you have to do. So it can be, I honestly wish it didn't exist. If it didn't exist, I wouldn't participate in it at all. I'd much rather be focused on other things, but it is part of the process. So I kind of deal with it as it comes.
Yes. Well, Ethan, I would like to know more about this trilogy of albums, because your recent record, Inland Empire, is like an epilogue from that trilogy. This trilogy of The Tide Decides, Tomorrow Will Tell the Story, A Priori Memoriae. What's behind that trilogy? Why these three albums are part of the same concept?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's. I kind of came upon the idea that it was a trilogy almost years after it was completely done, and that runs from The Tide Decides, Tomorrow Will Tell the Story, and then A Priori Memory. I would say that The Tide Decides originally was about a character. I'm trying to remember now. It was about a character that was basically going through a kind of a birth through death kind of scenario, and it was also connected to the life of the Earth, how long the Earth has been in the cosmos. Let's say, if they were running concurrently, that was the idea in my head. And then Tomorrow Will Tell the Story was basically purgatory, and I this is after death, this sort of area where you're kind of floating. A lot of people talk about, if they have near-death experiences, they feel like they experience part of this. And I think a lot of the lyrics on Tomorrow Will Tell the Story kind of suggested that to me, and that's why it became that. And then A Priori was really just the afterlife, and that was kind of why I called it a trilogy, kind of after the fact. But they all seem connected, and they weaved a few different themes, throughout them, and then Inland Empire came out of the back of A Priori. And I worked on those two together at the same time in 2013. and I had to complete them pretty quickly. A priori was the primary project, but then I had all this backlog of material from from all three albums, from the last three albums that I was working on, including A priori, that were all really strong pieces. There was like about 5, 6 or so pieces that were very, very strong that needed an outlet, you know. And then I had a few others, newer songs like Dark Shock or Singing, not Dark Shock, Singing with You was definitely new. Um, um, uh, so I had to figure out how I could put those together into their own thing, but I was just kind of shooting from the hip. I didn't really think they would fit together in an album, you know, but since I had the tracks done or completed up to a certain extent, I started just butting them up against each other. And then I created some musical segues at the start and finish of each of those tracks. And you know, some people it's interesting because some people say that like, well, Inland Empire is kind of fitting together almost better than the other ones. And I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, I remember after I got done with it and we were releasing A priori in on this German label, I was like, I kept listening to Inland Empire, and I usually don't listen to the albums I work on too much. I mean, I'll revisit them every few years because I want to remember, you know, what happened. But I won't spend a whole lot of time just sitting there, you know, on my own, you know, listening to it intently. But that one I would drive around a lot and kind of review it, and like I was like, oh, I just have to wait like a year and a half, and then we can probably put this one out. And then a bunch of stuff got in the way, you know, and I started working on new material, and so Inland Empire just ended up sitting for like 10 years. So yeah, that's kind of like how it came to be, and why it's connected to all those albums. It's just because it's so old, but at the same time, it doesn't really, to me, it's like I could have created it later, I think too. So
Yes. And talking about the Inland Empire, as you said, that sitting to hear this material after 10 years, how was this experience of listening to these songs and finally release it this year after 10 years, and to find some kind of connection of that material to the present moment?
I will say that like, I mean, it is really nice to hear again, you know, but I absorb my music so much because I basically do too many different parts of it for my own good. You know, I do all the way down to the mastering. So I hear this stuff thousands of times, bit by bit when working on it. So for me, at this stage, especially something that is 10 years old, I mean, to have it really connect with me in any way, you know, like on a personal level now is you know, proves, I think, that it's pretty strong material, I think. You know, at the same time, like all my albums, I kind of move past them, you know. Like I certainly like it's the whole thing of like I much there's a lot of other music that I will raise the hair on my back more than my own music because I didn't make it and I'm not absorbed in it, you know. So that's kind of, I mean, it is good that it has, that I felt enough. I mean, I could have just said, okay, I'm going to work on new material completely, and you know, if it takes another 2 years, you know, do something else and just not release Inland Empire. But I've already been taking a little bit of a break since When Song Spires came out. And I'm not quite sure where I want to go. So this was a perfect timing to just to put this out and get it done. And then, you know, give me a little bit more time to work on new stuff too. So
Great, Ethan. Well, these questions, I make these questions to many musicians in the world that belongs to what we call progressive rock or progressive music. And I'm always fascinated about the answers of the musicians. I would like to ask you, for you, beyond genres, beyond categories, what means for you to be progressive, to have a progressive point of view for music?
yeah, for music, for me, it was like, I was into all, I mean, although it kind of goes back to my first band and being involved in the progressive metal scene in the late 90s, is I wanted, like, we had made this music and it was that, but I wanted to, it was progressive metal with a lot of synthesizers, but I wanted to move on and do something different. And for me, that was like the essence of being progressive about your musicality, whether it's, no matter the genre, whether it's rock or metal or whatever, is let's really work on moving forward. And even if some people don't like that, that's fine. It doesn't mean that you don't come back and revisit other things later. I mean, it's funny with progressive rock. Like I went through this phase where I really didn't like it for a long time and put out a lot of quite more electronic music. And then like with a priori memory in 2013, 2014, when I was working on that's a really a purely progressive album. I mean, it has different things in it, new age and ambient elements, but it's like I went back and did something that I hadn't done since Greyhaven. Really, it was to make something really ridiculously complex, and it was really tough because I was working on playing classical guitar and doing other things too, and then incorporating that all in. So I mean, I've always felt I have quite a bit of connection to progressive rock, but it's always kind of been like I have just as much a connection to pop music, and different things, and even folk and world music to some degree. But progressive rock tends to be like this pole that everything, or this circle that everything kind of revolves around. And I'm really, for me, a lot of the like Berlin School 1970s electronic progressive music was just as important as like, Yes and Rush and all of the usual big progressive rock stalwarts. I kind of didn't go too far deep into mainline progressive rock. I kind of veered off into ambient music, and I like a lot of pop music too. I mean, and folk, I mentioned I'm a huge Dire Straits fan, Mark Knopfler fan. And then lately I listen to a lot more electronic music too, that's more deep ambient, like Ulrich Schnauss and people like that. I really love musicians that just kind of are very guided and have a similar aesthetic in terms of like their music is very inspirational, and like I relate to that. I don't get too much as into the technical stuff, as I have in more like back 10 years ago or so. But yeah, like progressive to me has always kind of meant forward thinking, and I've never really thought of it too much as just one particular genre. I think that I'm also a huge Marillion fan. I have to say that, they were always like both eras. I grew up on the Fish and the Hogarth era, and they were always very important to our inspiration, even when we are playing back in Greyhaven. But yeah, like I know there was a lot of debate back then as to what progressive rock was supposed to be. And maybe there still is, it's kind of still going on to some degree, but yeah.
Great. Well, Ethan, what's in the future? What is coming for you as a musician, as a person, and for Echoes?
Right now, I mean, just continuing to put this out. I am working on newer material. It's hard to say what it's going to be yet. I'm trying to work more with synthesizers again, just because I haven't done, it's always like 50%, but I'd sort of like to make another album where the synth aspect is 80% or something like that, is bigger and more. But I also I have to be careful you know, just in general, not because it's ambient or electronic or progressive electronic or whatever, but I have to just be careful that I'm not gonna, you know, repeat what I've been already doing. And usually, like, I'll catch myself because I'll get bored with it. You know, like there'll be, you know, I'm getting closer. Like it's I feel like I'm building towards, you know, where I can get to those very inspirational times where there's, you know, lyrics involved and things are kind of coming together um, in a very intuitive fashion. But like I said, like I've had to take a break because I feel like I've done a lot, you know, for considering that I do a lot of things on my own, you know, with the help of other musicians, but also just, you know, completing all the production processes and, you know, dealing with all of that and the rest of life as it is. I've needed like a good, you know, few years break from doing really intense stuff. So I'm trying to get back into it basically, you know, to be perfectly honest. And I feel like the next thing that I do will probably be quite different. I feel like Echo Us has kind of reached a point of, I'm not going to say a point of closure necessarily. Um, I still, you know, I have debated about, you know, doing something under my own name or just, you know, doing something different entirely, a different project too. But when I listen to the music I do, like it's still like even the stuff I've got in the studio right now, it's like it still sounds like Echo Us music to a degree. So until it really takes a veer in a different direction, I think it's likely that there'll be more Echo Us in the future. So
Wonderful, Ethan. Well, I can tell you how honored, how grateful I am for the time that you take to answer my questions. Do you have some words for the fans of Mexico, for the people of Mexico that probably follows you, or probably this is going to be the first contact with your music? Do you have some words for them?
no, thank you guys for listening and checking things out. You know, I do hear sometimes from the Southern Hemisphere, particularly it seems like Brazil and other countries, but it tends to be, and I actually hear less from the U.S. these days than other places. You know, the music scene is different here. So, you know, thanks guys for listening, and I appreciate Roberto the chance to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for your time, Ethan.
Thank you.